Her husband died in a car crash, but she found him living with another woman in another state. What would you do if the man you buried was serving jollof rice to another woman in a roadside restaurant? What would you do if your husband faked his own death and started life with another woman in another state? Sit down. Breathe. Because this story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and lies. It was raining heavily that night. Grace Ocone had just put on her nightrobe and was sipping hot tea in her living room when the phone rang. She glanced at the time. 11:07 p.m. The screen said, "Unknown caller." She hesitated, then answered. A deep male voice came through. "Good evening, Ma. Please, are you the wife of Mr. Kenneth Ocone?" Her heart skipped. "Yes, I am. I'm sorry to inform you that your husband's car was found completely burnt along the expressway. There were no survivors. The ID card and plate number match his information." Everything stopped. Cup. Heartbeat. Wait. No, that's not possible," Grace stammered. "He told me he was in Abuja for a business meeting. I just spoke to him." "We understand, Ma. But we'll need you to come to the police station in the morning. We are very sorry for your loss." Grace screamed, dropped the phone, fell to her knees. The body was never found. The fire had allegedly destroyed everything. But the police handed her her husband's ID card, his burnt wristwatch, and a broken car key. People came. They cried. Neighbors murmured. "He was such a good man. He always bought fuel for us when we couldn't afford it. Grace is such a young widow. She buried an empty coffin. And in it she buried her peace." Grace changed. She stopped smiling, stopped wearing makeup. She moved into a smaller apartment and focused on work at the hospital. People said, "She's strong." But they didn't know that every night, she held her husband's shirt and cried herself to sleep. She lit candles every month on the day he died. Until 1 year later, life lit a flame she didn't expect. Grace joined a volunteer medical outreach to another state, Cross River. They arrived early, set up tents, and started treating patients. At about 1 p.m., she stepped away to get something to eat. She entered a small eatery beside the road. And that's when her world shattered again. He was laughing, behind the counter, wearing a white apron, handing out plates of rice and beans. He didn't see her, but Grace saw him. Kenneth, her husband, the man she buried, alive, serving food, smiling. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, took slow steps closer. He turned, and their eyes met. The tray in her hand dropped, and so did every illusion she ever believed. "Grace," he whispered. Her knees buckled. He rushed forward and caught her before she fell. What are you doing here?" she gasped. His eyes darted. "Come outside. Please." A woman walked out from the back. "Babe, I need your help." "Why?" "Oh." She saw Grace. Grace saw the ring on her finger, and realized her husband had remarried. They had been married for 4 years. Met during NZ. Fell in love fast. He was charming, thoughtful. Used to leave notes in her scrubs. They talked about kids. Built savings. Bought land together. She never thought he was perfect, but she thought he was hers. Now, she realized she didn't even know him. Outside, under a tree behind the eatery, they spoke in whispers. She was shaking. You're alive. Why would you do this to me? To us." He looked guilty. "I'm sorry, Grace. Messed up. I owed some dangerous people. Faking my death was the only way to disappear." Tears streamed down her face. "So you let me suffer. Mourn you. Bury an empty coffin. I didn't mean for it to go that far. But once the fire happened, I saw a way out." She looked him dead in the eye. "And her. You replaced me." He looked away. She doesn't know the truth. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. Something wasn't adding up. Why was a man in hiding running a business openly in another state? Why was he wearing designer slippers if he was in trouble? The next day she called an IT friend. He ran a trace on Kenneth's BVN. What they discovered was chilling. Kenneth had opened 3 new accounts using false names, and moved over 85 million Nigerian nairas out of their joint savings. Grace met with a lawyer. They began digging. Fake IDs, false declarations, stolen money, bigamy. She didn't just want closure anymore. She wanted accountability and justice, not just for her, but for the woman he was currently deceiving. Grace returned to the eatery one last time. She secretly recorded everything. His confession, his admission of fake death, his denial of children and past. When she asked if he ever loved her, he whispered, "I loved you, but I loved freedom more." That was the final straw. She sent the footage to his new wife, then to the authorities. The next morning, Kenneth Okon was arrested for fraud, identity falsification, and abandonment. His new wife fainted when she saw the marriage certificate from 5 years ago. Grace stood outside the station watching. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She was simply done. Months passed. She returned to her city, started counseling young widows and abandoned wives. One day, she stood before 200 women and said, "He didn't kill me when he left. He birthed me." Sometimes betrayal is the wind that removes the roof, so you can see the stars again. Kenneth's arrest spread like wildfire. Blogs picked it up. Woman finds dead husband running new life in Cross River. Twitter exploded. Some blamed him. Some blamed Grace. Others were just shocked. But none of them knew the truth Grace carried inside, that he stole her peace, her dignity, and her years. She was ready to take it all back. The courtroom was tense. Kenneth stood in the dock, disheveled, defeated. Grace, calm but stern, sat with her lawyer. The judge's voice echoed. "Mr. Kenneth Okon, you are being charged with the following: faking your death, bigamy, fraud, and identity tampering. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," he muttered. Gasps filled the room. Grace clenched her fist. She expected shame. But Kenneth came here to fight. Kenneth's lawyer argued. He didn't fake his death intentionally. The car crash was real, and he simply chose not to come back. He believed Grace would be better off without him. His second marriage wasn't legal. It was traditional only. It was manipulation, dressed in strategy. But Grace had come prepared. Ijeoma, Grace's lawyer, stood. "Your Honor, here's a recorded confession from the defendant stating, and I quote, 'Faking my death was the only way to escape debt.'" She played the clip. Kenneth's voice rang out clear. "I loved you, but I loved freedom more." The courtroom fell silent. Even Kenneth lowered his head. Suddenly Kenneth's second wife, Sophia, stepped forward. Tears in her eyes. Confused. Devastated. "Your Honor, I have a 1-year-old son with Kenneth. I demand a DNA test." Grace turned to look at her. There it was. The final betrayal. Kenneth not only left her, he built a new family on her broken dreams. That night Grace cried, not because he had a child, but because she once believed she wasn't good enough to give him one. She had suffered a miscarriage 2 years before his death, and blamed herself. Now she realized. He had already checked out emotionally long before he checked out physically. The next hearing was set for 3 weeks later. During that time, Grace's evidence was broadcast nationwide. Kenneth's accounts were frozen. Sophia moved out with the child and refused to speak to him. Kenneth tried calling Grace from prison. She declined every time. This wasn't personal revenge anymore. This was a reckoning. One rainy evening, Grace heard a knock. An old woman stood at her door, tears in her eyes. "Please. I'm Kenneth's mother. May I come in?" Grace froze, then stepped aside. The old woman knelt. "My son is wrong. We never knew what he did to you. He lied to us. We buried clothes in his name. I only found out the truth when I saw you on TV." Grace's heart softened, but only slightly. "He may be your son, But he stopped being a husband the day he let me bury ashes. Her legal team demanded 85 million Nigerian nairas in stolen funds, 20 million Nigerian nairas in emotional damages, custody of all jointly owned properties, official nullification of the second marriage. Kenneth refused, so they went to war. Day 1. Kenneth cried in court trying to win sympathy. Day 2. Grace presented receipts of missing funds, traced from their joint savings. Day 3. The DNA result arrived. Kenneth was the father. Day 4. Sophia submitted a statement saying he lied to her from the start. On day 5, the judge asked Kenneth a final question. Did you love your wife when you left? He was silent, then said, I thought I did, but I wanted more. The judge nodded. You will now receive less for the rest of your life. Court ruling. Kenneth Okon sentenced to 6 years in prison for fraud and falsifying documents. Ordered to pay 75 million Nigerian nairas in restitution to Grace. Grace awarded full ownership of their joint properties. The second marriage declared invalid. Grace stood up slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply walked out with her head high. With the compensation funds, Grace opened a mental health foundation for abandoned women, began speaking at legal empowerment conferences, rebuilt her clinic in a rural area that lacked access to healthcare. Her story touched millions, not because of how she suffered, but because of how she stood up. A major TV channel invited her. Grace, if you could say one thing to Kenneth now, what would it be? She looked straight into the camera. Thank you for dying, so I could live again. 2 years later, Grace met someone. Not in a rush. Not for healing. But for love. Lawyer. Kind. Focused. Faith-filled. On their wedding day, she wore a white dress. The same one she never got to wear fully the first time. This time there was no deception. Only peace. After the trial, Grace's name exploded even more. She was praised. She was envied. She was hated. Blogs called her the widow who fought the dead. Some churches called her rebellious for not forgiving. Others said she was an inspiration. But Grace had grown a skin thicker than steel. She didn't live for opinions. She lived for peace. And peace wasn't just in silence anymore. It was in purpose. One evening, Grace received a voice message from Sophia, Kenneth's second woman. She was crying. I didn't know Grace. He said he was an orphan. Said you died. Said he'd been hurt before. And I believed him. Please forgive me. I walked into your grave without knowing I was stepping on your name. Grace sat still for a long time. Then replied. You weren't my enemy. You were his excuse. Heal in peace. That message went viral. Viewers called it the most graceful forgiveness in history. Kenneth's mother and father came again. This time with a priest. This time with tears. We were ashamed, the father said. But you didn't deserve silence. He dishonored our entire family. Grace looked at them and for the first time in years saw sincerity. If you truly want peace, she said, donate to the shelter I built. They gave 10 million Nigerian nairas. Not for redemption, but for restoration. Grace turned her inheritance into the Phoenix House. A safe space for women who had been abandoned, lied to, or widowed young. Each room bore the name of a virtue. Hope, courage, justice, truth. Every woman who walked in crying, left standing taller. Kenneth began sending letters. 1 per month. I miss you. I regret it. I was a fool. Grace never replied. Until the 12th letter. She sent back a single page. I pray you find God. Not to escape your sentence. But so you never become this man again. That was the last time he wrote. Grace was nominated for Humanitarian of the Year. The governor's wife called her a symbol of grace under fire. In her acceptance speech, Grace said, I didn't survive fire because I'm strong. I survived because I didn't let the fire make me bitter. I let it burn the old me and reveal the real me. A women's conference in South Africa invited Grace to speak. While preparing for the trip, she received a surprise visitor. Daniel. Lawyer. Kind-hearted. She had met him during Kenneth's trial, but hadn't paid him much attention then. This time he came to say goodbye before her flight. "You're not just rising, Grace. You're flying. Literally." She smiled. He smiled. And something beautiful began again. Slowly. Months passed. Daniel visited her clinic, helped with legal issues at her shelter, made her laugh in a way she thought she'd forgotten. He never rushed her, never brought up her past unless she did. Then one day, under a quiet rainstorm, he said, "I don't want to replace your past. I just want to walk beside your future." And she said yes. Months passed. Daniel visited her clinic, helped with legal issues at her shelter, made her laugh in a way she thought she'd forgotten. He never rushed her, never brought up her past unless she did. Then one day, under a quiet rainstorm, he said, "I don't want to replace your past. I just want to walk beside your future." And she said yes. This time there was no car crash, no funeral dresses in disguise, no secrets, no apologies, only love, only truth. The guests clapped, the rain stopped, and as they kissed, someone whispered, "She died once, but she came back with fire in her eyes." A filmmaker documented Grace's story, titled, "Buried but Breathing." The final scene showed Grace walking into her shelter, arms open wide, saying to a new guest, "You're not broken. You're just in the fire. And fire only purifies gold." Dear viewer, Grace's story is not about a cheating man. It's about the power of resurrection while still alive. It's about how some betrayals are blessings, wrapped in ashes. Sometimes the person you loved has to leave, or even fake death, so you can wake up to your own worth. If you're still stuck grieving someone who betrayed you, remember, you didn't lose them. They lost you. And like Grace, you too can rise from that coffin they buried your future in. Comment if this story spoke to your soul. Share this with someone who's healing. Subscribe to ZITA'S Stories for more tales that don't just entertain, they heal, ignite, and rebuild. Because on this channel, pain doesn't win. You do.